Hey guys, tonight we're going to set sail on the high seas, not in search of buried treasure or epic naval battles, but to investigate something far more fundamental to a pirate's life, the pantry. We're journeying back to the Golden Age of Piracy, roughly from the 1690 seconds to the 1720 seconds, to uncover why the food was, to put it mildly, absolutely terrible. You might romanticize the freedom of a pirate's life, but trust me, after a week of their diet, you'd probably rather walk the plank than eat what was on it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps this little corner of the internet grow. And, as always, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from tonight. Drop your city and the current time in the comments below. It's always a joy to see our community of night owls. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ink is barely dry on the ship's articles. You've signed your name or made your mark pledging your allegiance to the crew of the Sea Serpent and its formidable captain. The thrill is electric. You've done it. You've escaped the drudgery of your old life, the tyrannical thumb of a merchant captain, or the crushing poverty of a port town. Ahead of you lies a life of liberty, equality, and the promise of unimaginable riches. Your head is full of gold doubloons, exotic islands, and the intoxicating idea of being a master of your own destiny. The ship itself is a chaotic symphony of activity. The deck is a tangled maze of ropes, barrels, and spare sails. The air is thick with the smell of tar, damp wood, and the faint, unpleasant odor of bilge water. Men shout commands, their voices rough and seasoned by salt and sun. It's not the pristine, majestic vessel of your imagination, but it feels alive, a creature of purpose, and you are now part of it. As the sun begins to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in fiery colors, a new sound cuts through the chaos. It's a bellowing, gravelly voice from a hatchway near the ship's stern. Grubs up, come and get it, for I toss it to the sharks. This is the call to dinner. There is no gentle bell, no formal announcement. Thy wave of anticipation, or perhaps just raw hunger, moves through the crew. You see the other pirates, men from all corners of the globe. Fanxia, they're working from a rough, jostling line. You grab the wooden bowl and tin cup issued to you earlier and join them. You finally reach the galley hatch. Peering down, you see the source of the summons, the ship's cook. HES, a large man with a magnificent beard, and you notice the wooden leg propped casually against a barrel. He doesn't look like a chef, he looks like a man who has seen more battles than kitchens. He wields a large, greasy ladle, sloshing a brownish stew from a massive copper cauldron into each pirate's bowl. He then gestures to a large, open barrel next to him. You follow the lead of the man in front of you and use a pair of tongs to pull out a couple of large, grayish-white biscuits. You find a place to sit on a coiled length of rope, balancing your bowl on your knees. This is your first meal as a pirate, a free man. You look down at your bounty. The stew is a watery concoction with a few sad-looking chunks of meat and what might be some kind of dried peas floating in it. The biscuits are the real curiosity. They are perfectly round, about half an inch thick, and look less like food and more like something you'd use to tile a floor. You take a bite of the stew. It's salty. In fact, salty doesn't even begin to describe it. It's an aggressive, tongue-curling saltiness that overwhelms any other flavor the meat might have once possessed. The meat itself is tough and stringy. Then, you try the biscuit. You lift it to your mouth and bite down. Or rather, you try to bite down. It's like trying to take a bite out of a piece of lumber. Your teeth make a loud, unpleasant clack as they hit the unyielding surface. You look around, embarrassed. You see a veteran pirate next to you take his biscuit, place it on the deck, and give it a sharp rap with the handle of his knife, breaking it into smaller, more manageable pieces. He then drops the pieces into his stew to soften. You follow his example, Feeling like a fool? This is your introduction to the sailor's diet, a cornerstone of maritime life for centuries. The main historical point here is that ships' provisions weren't chosen for taste or nutrition, but for one thing only: longevity. That salt-drenched meat, likely beef or pork, was cured to last for months, even years, in a barrel. That biscuit, known as hardtack or ship's biscuit, was a simple mix of flour, water, and a little salt, baked until it was completely devoid of moisture, making it resistant to mold. Here's a peculiar fact: there were no forks. Your only utensil is the knife at your belt, used for everything from cutting rope to cutting your dinner. You spear a piece of the tough, salty meat and chew, and chew, and chew. Historians still debate the true psychological impact of this diet on sailors. Was the terrible food a constant source of misery and a primary motivator for mutiny, as it often was in the Royal Navy, or did pirates, having chosen this life, accept the grim fare as a fair trade for their freedom and the potential for riches, perhaps the dream of capturing a merchant ship laden with fresh stock, fruits, and fine wines made the daily reality of hardtack and salt horse more bearable? You look at your dinner, then out at the endless expanse of the ocean. The golden dream of riches is still out there, that a new, much more mundane reality has just set in. You are going to be eating this, or something very much like it, every single day for the foreseeable future. Suddenly, the simple meal you took for granted in your old life, a piece of fresh bread, a simple vegetable stew, seems like a banquet fit for a king. The adventure has begun, but so has the regret. The greasy just sits heavy in your stomach, a salty anchor in a sea of regret. Your thoughts drift from the abstract dream of gold to the very concrete, very unpleasant reality of your dinner. Who is responsible for this culinary crime? Your curiosity, and the need to rinse your bowl, leads you back to the galley hatch. You peer down into the cook's domain. H.E.S. there, leaning against a barrel, cleaning his massive cauldron with a piece of rough canvas. This is Silas, the ship's cook, or, as the crew calls him behind his back, Peggy, a nickname you wisely decide to keep to yourself. He moves with a surprising agility for a man with 1.5 legs, his wooden peg thumping a steady rhythm on the floorboards. The position of ship's cook was a unique one, especially on a pirate vessel. This is a key historical point. The cook was often a man who was no longer fit for the physically demanding work of climbing the rigging or manning the cannons. He was frequently a seasoned sailor who had lost a limb in a previous engagement or a shipyard accident. Giving him the lighter duty of cooking was a form of maritime social security, a way for a valuable, experienced crewman to remain a contributing member of the company. It was a respected position, not because the food was good, but because food was life. You make your way down the ladder into his space. The galley is not a kitchen. It's a cramped, smoky, and unbelievably hot corner of the ship. The centerpiece is a brick-lined box filled with sand, called a camboose or fire hearth. In this box, a small, carefully controlled fire smolders. This is where all the cooking happens. It's a terrifyingly simple setup: an open flame on a wooden ship in the middle of the ocean. A stray spark, a sudden lurch of the ship, could spell disaster for everyone. The cook's first and most important job was not flavor, but fire prevention. Silas sees you and grunts a greeting. He doesn't have the air of a chef. He has the air of a quartermaster, a man whose job is to manage a dwindling, unprecious resource. He is the guardian of the provisions. He, along with the ship's actual quartermaster, holds the keys to the storerooms where the barrels of meat, biscuits, and water are kept. His authority in this small, hot space is absolute. Historians still argue about the exact status of the ship's cook in the highly structured world of a ship. On a Royal Navy vessel, he might have been seen as little more than a servant. But on a pirate ship, with its supposedly democratic structure, the cook's role was more complex. Was he a respected craftsman, a vital officer responsible for the crew's morale and/or survival, or was he simply the old, broken down guy given the least desirable job that didn't involve climbing. Looking at the way the crew gives Silas a wide berth, you suspect it leans towards the former. No one wants to get on the wrong side of the man who controls the rations. Clean bowl is a happy bowl, Silas growls, gesturing to a bucket of seawater. You dutifully rinse your bowl and cup. As you do, you notice something strange. In the corner of the galley is a barrel that smells particularly foul. It's filled with a greasy, semi-solid sludge. This brings us to a weirdly fascinating perk of being the ship's cook, the slush fund. The greasy scum skimmed from the top of the cauldron. When boiling the salt meat, the slush was a valuable commodity. It was a low-grade tallow or animal fat. The cook would collect all of this slush into a barrel. When the ship reached a friendly port, he had the right to sell the slush to candle makers or tanners. The money he made was his to keep. It was his personal bonus. A greasy, foul-smelling, but surprisingly lucrative side hustle. This slush fund became a common term for any discretionary money set aside for unofficial purposes, a phrase that has survived for centuries. You hand your clean bowl back to Silas, who inspects it with a critical eye before nodding. You have passed muster. You now understand that this man is not here to make you happy. He is not a chef, he is a logistician. He is a master of preservation, rationing, and fire safety. His job isn't to delight your palate, it's to keep you from starving before you find a prize worth taking. The quality of the food is secondary to the fact that there is food at all. And as you climb back onto the deck, you realize that the provisions you're eating now are the best they're going to be for a very long time. Soon, you'll be weeks from shore, and things are going to get much, much worse. The first few days out of port are a period of deceptive bounty. The ship is a hive of activity, sails are trimmed, and the rhythm of life at sea begins to take hold. But more importantly, the food is, relatively speaking, fantastic. This is the honeymoon phase of the pirate pantry, and you are soaking it all in, knowing it won't last. The ship's hold is packed to the gills with provisions acquired during the final frantic days in a place like Nassau or Tortuga. The key historical point here is that a pirate ship, just like any other long-haul vessel of the era, had to be a self-contained, floating storehouse before setting off on a cruise that could last for months. The quartermaster would oversee the loading of an immense quantity of food and drink. You see barrels everywhere, barrels of hardtack, thousands of them, barrels of salt beef and salt pork, the foundation of your future diet. There are sacks of dried peas, beans, and oats. There are huge, hard wheels of cheese, coated in wax to prevent mold. And, of course, there are barrels upon barrels of beer, rum, and, most importantly, water. But for now, in these first precious days, you're eating the fresh provisions. These are the perishable goods that were bought or acquired just before departure. On deck, in makeshift pens, are live animals. A handful of scrawny chickens cluck nervously. A couple of goats, destined for both their meat and their milk, eye you with what seems like deep suspicion. There might even be a pig or two. These walking meals are the most luxurious items in your larder, and their days are numbered. The first few dinners are whirled away from the salties tea you had on your first night. Silas, the cook, slaughters a chicken. The smell of roasting meat, a genuine, non-salt cured aroma, drifts across the deck and feels like the most decadent perfume imaginable. You are served a piece of actual, tender chicken, perhaps with a side of onions or yams that were also part of the fresh stores. It's a feast, a glorious, unforgettable feast. You might even have fresh bread for the first few days, before the flour gets infested or the yeast gives out. Silas might bake loaves in his brick-lined hearth. The bread is dense and smoky, but it's soft. You tear off a piece and eat it without needing to soak it in anything. It feels like a miracle. The water, too, is at its peak. It's drawn from the freshest barrels, and while it still has a woody taste, It's relatively clear and clean. You drink your daily ration without having to hold your nose. This initial period of plenty was a crucial part of the ship's routine. It was a morale booster, a way to get the crew into good spirits and good physical condition before the long, lean months ahead. It was also a race against time. The crew had to consume the fresh goods before they inevitably spoiled. Here's a peculiar little fact about these early days: the beer. Ships often carried huge quantities of what was called small beer. This was a weak, low-alcohol beer. It was a staple of the sailors' diet, not just for its intoxicating effects, but because it was safer to drink than water. The brewing process killed most of the harmful bacteria, and the beer would stay potable for longer than water stored in the same conditions. So, your daily ration of drink, often up to a gallon a day, would be mostly this weak beer. It hydrated you and provided calories, all while giving you a mild, pleasant buzz. But you can already see the end of this golden era approaching. One of the goats has been slaughtered. The pen of chickens is looking sparse. The last of the fresh yams were in last night's stew. The transition is coming. Soon, the live animals will be a fond memory. The fresh bread will be replaced by the rock-hard biscuit. The beer will run out, and you'll be on to the water, which is even now beginning to stagnate in its barrel. The historical debate here often revolves around planning and preservation. How effective were pirates at provisioning their ships? Were they reckless hedonists who feasted for a weekend, then starved for a month, or were they experienced mariners who, despite their lawless reputation, understood the harsh necessities of life at sea and planned, accordingly, the very existence of a powerful quartermaster, whose job was to oversee and ration these supplies, suggests the latter. They were outlaws, but they weren't stupid. They knew that a well-fed crew was a happy and defective crew. You savor every last bite of your roasted chicken. You lick the grease from your fingers. A precious flavor you won't taste again for a long time. This isn't just a meal, it's a memory you are consciously creating. It's a benchmark of flavor and freshness that you will cling to in the coming weeks as your diet descends into a monotonous cycle of salt, starch, and weevils. The feast is over. The voyage and the famine has truly begun. The last of the fresh bread is a fond, distant memory. The chickens are gone, their clucking replaced by the ceaseless creak of the ship's timbers. Now, you are formally introduced to your constant companion for the remainder of the voyage, the undisputed king of the pirate pantry hardtack. You've already had a brief, painful encounter with this substance, but now you must learn to live with it. It is your bread, your cracker, your staple, your everything. It is served with every meal, and it is the only thing available for a snack between them. The ship's hold contains barrels upon barrels of these biscuits. They were baked months ago in a commercial bakery on shore, designed for a long shelf life, not for human pleasure. The recipe is brutally simple: flour, water, and a bit of salt. The dough is rolled out and cut into thick, round discs, which are then pierced with a docker, a tool that makes the small, regular holes on the surface. These holes are not for decoration, they help the biscuit bake evenly and ensure all moisture is driven out. The biscuits are then baked multiple times until they are as hard and dry as a piece of fired clay. This process makes them incredibly durable and resistant to mold. This is the central historical point of hardtack. It was a triumph of food preservation technology in an age before canning or refrigeration. It could, in theory, last for years. In fact, some hardtack baked for the American Civil War was still edible in a purely technical sense decades later. You receive your daily ration, a few of these dense, off-white discs. The first challenge is simply breaking them. As you learn it on your first day, biting into one is an invitation for a dental disaster. The veteran sailors have a variety of techniques. Some smash it with a belaying pin. Others use the butt of their pistol. The most common method is to place it on a hard surface and give it a sharp rap with your knife handle. hoping it breaks into bite-sized chunks rather than exploding into useless crumbs. Once broken, the next challenge is making it edible. The most common method, which you quickly adopt, is to drop the pieces into whatever hot liquid is available. In the morning, it's your coffee a bitter, burnt grain concoction, not the fine stuff. At dinner, it's your stew. The hardtack soaks up the liquid, slowly softening into a mushy, bland paste. It's not delicious, but it adds bulk to the meal and fills your belly. But as the weeks turn into months, a new feature is added to your hardtack experience, the weevils. Despite the biscuit's dryness, it is not impervious to infestation. The ship's hold is dark, damp, and home to a thriving population of tiny beetles known as weevils. They burrow into the barrels and lay their eggs in the hardtack. Soon, your daily biscuit comes with a little extra protein. At first, the sight of the small, dark insects crawling out of your food is nauseating. You try to pick them out, but you quickly realize this is a futile effort. For everyone you see, there are a dozen more hidden inside. This leads to a peculiar bit of shipboard etiquette and the gallows humor that sailors developed over centuries. You learn the tap method. Before you dunk your hardtack in your coffee, you tap it firmly on the table. This encourages the living weevils to fall out. As for the ones that don't, well, the old sailor's saying comes to mind, it's the worms that eat you in the grave, so you might as well eat them first. Another common joke was that it was better to eat in the dark, so you couldn't see what you were eating. The weevils were so common they were often called sailor's bread or skipper's passengers. Historians still debate the nutritional impact of a diet so heavily reliant on this one foodstuff. It provided carbohydrates and calories, but little else. It lacked essential vitamins and fiber. Was the constant, low-level consumption of insects a source of disgust and misery? Or did sailors, out of necessity, genuinely come to see it as an unavoidable and even slightly beneficial extra protein? Part of their meal, the sheer number of jokes and grim sayings on the topic suggests that while they accepted it, they never truly enjoyed it. It was a symbol of the hardship and the often disgusting reality of life at sea. You sit on the deck, tapping your biscuit. A few small, dark specks fall onto the wood. You brush them away without a second thought, drop the pieces into your stew, and begin to eat. You've adapted. You no longer see it as an infested biscuit. You just see it as dinner. This, you realize, is what it means to be a sailor. It's the ability to accept the unacceptable, to stomach the unstomachable, and to keep going, one weevil-ridden bite at a time. With hardtack now a familiar, if unloved, part of your daily life, you turn your attention to the other pillar of the pirate menu, the salt meat. Every few days, the quartermast strand, the cook will descend into the ship's hold and return with a large, dripping chunk of what is allegedly beef for pork, hauled from a massive wooden barrel. The meat doesn't look like anything you'd find at a butcher's shop. It's a dark, purplish-brown color, and it's encased in a thick crust of coarse, gray salt. The smell is sharp and slightly acrid, a testament to the sheer quantity of preservative used. This is salt horse or salt junk, the primary source of protein for any long sea voyage. The process of creating it was simple and brutal. Back on shore, butchers would carve up entire carcasses of beef or pork. The cuts were not prime, they were the cheapest, toughest parts of the animal. These chunks of meat were then packed into barrels, with a thick layer of salt between each layer of meat. A heavy, saturated brine was then poured over the top to fill any remaining gaps. The barrels were sealed and were now, in theory, ready to survive for years without spoiling. The key historical point here is that this method of preservation was ancient, dating back to Roman times, but it was perfected by the great naval powers of the 17th and 18th centuries. The ability to store vast quantities of protein was what allowed ships to stay at sea for months on end, enabling global exploration, trade, and, of course, piracy. The British Royal Navy, in particular, had a massive, industrialized system for producing salt meat to supply its global fleet. Before Silas the cook can even think about putting this meat in the stew, it has to be prepared. The first step is to desalinate it, at least partially. A chunk of the meat is placed in a net and towed behind the ship for a day, letting the ocean water wash away the thick outer layer of salt. Then, it's soaked in a bucket of precious fresh water for hours, with the water being changed several times. This process leaches out some, but not nearly all, of the salt. When it's finally ready for the cauldron, the meat is still incredibly salty and has the texture of shoe leather. Silas chops it into smaller chunks and boils it for hours. The boiling process does little to tenderize the tough, stringy muscle fibers. What it does do is create the greasy, salty broth that forms the base of your daily stew. You watch as a fellow pirate tightly carves a piece of the cooked salt beef. It's so tough and dense that it can be carved into shapes, almost like wood. This is where the name salt horse comes from. Sailors joked that the meat was so tough, it could only have come from an old, worn-out horse. Salt junk was another popular name. Junk being an old sailor's term for scraps of old rope, which the meat's stringy texture was said to resemble. A weirdly specific, and rather grim, fact about the salt meat barrels: sometimes things other than meat ended up in them. The packing process in the dockyards was not always meticulous. There are naval records and sailors, accounts of crews opening a barrel of salt pork only to find things like a misplaced boot, a butcher's tool, or, in some truly horrific cases, parts of a human being, likely a worker who fell into a vat during the salting process. The idea that your dinner might be sharing a barrel with a long-dead stranger is a uniquely unsettling thought. Historians debate the actual nutritional value of this heavily preserved meat. The salting process destroyed many of the vitamins, and the endless boiling leached out most of what was left. While it provided protein and calories, it was a nutritionally deficient food source. Was it better than nothing? Yes. Was it healthy? Absolutely not. This poor quality protein, combined with the vitamin-poor hardtack, created the perfect storm for the nutritional diseases that plagued sailors of the era. You spear a chunk of the boiled meat from your stew. It's flavorless. Apart from the overwhelming saltiness, you chew on it for what feels like a minute before you can finally swallow it. It's a joyless, purely functional experience. It's fuel, not food. You start to understand the deep, desperate craving that sailors had for fresh food. It wasn't just about taste, it was about a deep, physical need for real, unprocessed nutrition. Every bite of this tough, stringy, oversalted meat is a reminder of how far you are from land, and how much your body is suffering for it. Your diet of weevil-infested biscuits and leather-tough salt meat is grim, but at least you have something to wash it down with. For now, your attention now turns to the most critical resource on the ship, more precious than gold or fresh water. In port, the ship's massive wooden casks were filled with fresh water. That water, unlike salted meat or dried biscuit, does not preserve well in a wooden barrel on a rocking, sun-baked ship. After just a few weeks at sea, a horrifying transformation begins to take place. You go to get your daily ration. The quartermaster or his mate stands guard over the scuttlebutt, a cask of water kept on deck for the crew's use. He uses a ladle to pour a cupful into your tin mug. You look at it. The water is no longer clear. It has a distinct, greenish-brown tinge, and there are small, stringy things floating in it. You lift the cup to your nose. The smell is foul. It's a swampy, stagnant odor of rotten decay. This is what happens to water stored in a non-sterile wooden container for weeks on end. The wood itself leaches tannins into the water, turning it brown. But, more importantly, the water becomes a thriving ecosystem for algae, bacteria, and insect larvae. The stringy things you see are strands of green algae. If you look closely, you might see tiny mosquito larvae, known as wriggle-rs, swimming around. This is a crucial historical point about life. At sea, the water was often a source of disease. Sailors had no concept of germ theory. They didn't know that this foul-smelling liquid was teeming with microscopic organisms that could cause dysentery, typhoid, and other waterborne illnesses. Sickness was a constant threat, and the water supply was often the culprit. You have no choice but to drink it. Dehydration in the hot, salty air is a far more immediate threat than a potential sickness. You learn the trick that all sailors know: you hold your nose to block the smell, and you close your eyes so you can't see what you're drinking. You gulp it down as quickly as possible. The taste is as bad as the smell, like drinking from a stagnant pond. It's slimy and thick. This terrible water quality is what made alcoholic beverages so essential on board. As mentioned before, the small beer carried on many ships was a safer alternative. But once the beer ran out, the next line of defense was rum or other spirits. A little bit of rum mixed with the foul water did two things. First, the alcohol would kill some of the bacteria, making it slightly safer to drink. Second, and perhaps more importantly, the strong flavor of the rum would mask the disgusting taste of the putrid water. This leads us to a specific and famous maritime invention, grog. In 1740, a British admiral named Edward Vernon, nicknamed Old Grog because of the geogram cloak he often wore, ordered that the sailors' daily rum ration be diluted with water. His intention was to reduce drunkenness and keep the fleet more disciplined. The sailors hated it at first, but the practice of mixing rum and water, creating grog, soon became standard. His simple concoction made the terrible water palatable and extended the rum supply. Pirates, who were not bound by navy discipline, would have mixed their rum and water according to their own tastes and the quality of the water at hand. Historians are still exploring the full impact of poor hydration and contaminated water on the health and performance of sailors. It's one thing to fight a battle or climb a mast in a storm. It's another thing to do it while suffering from chronic lull, level dehydration, and the debilitating effects of dysentery. How much of the famed grumpiness and short temper of sailors can be attributed to the simple fact that they were constantly thirsty and drinking water that was actively making them sick? A weird but true fact: to try and purify the water, sailors would sometimes drop a hot piece of iron, like a heated cannonball, into the cask. The idea was that the heat would kill the vermin and improve the taste. It likely did very little, but in the absence of real science, such rituals provided a small measure of psychological comfort. You finish your cup of green, slimy water. It sloshes in your stomach, a disgusting reminder of your predicament. You are a pirate on the high seas, a free man, but you are also a prisoner, trapped on a wooden island, completely dependent on a dwindling supply of rotting provisions. You find yourself staring at the clouds, praying for rain. A rainstorm, which was once a miserable inconvenience, would now be a blessing, a chance to collect a few gallons of clean, fresh, untainted water. It's a strange world where you pray for a storm just to get a decent drink. The daily ritual of eating has become a necessary evil, a joyous task you perform to stay alive. And the heart of this grim operation is the galley, that cramped, smoky corner of the ship where Silas the cook performs his thankless job. You've been down there a few times, and every visit fills you with a new appreciation for the sheer danger of it all. The galley, as you've seen, is not a kitchen in any modern sense. It's a space defined by risk. The central feature, the brick-lined fire hearth, is a constant, smoldering threat. This is a major historical point that is easy to overlook. Fire was the single greatest non-combat danger on a wooden ship. A vessel like yours is essentially a floating tinderbox. The hull, the masts, the rigging, and the tar used to waterproof everything are all incredibly flammable. An uncontrolled fire could destroy the ship and kill everyone on board in a matter of minutes. The cook's primary responsibility, therefore, was fire management. The fire in the hearth was never left unattended. That night, Or, during a storm, it was extinguished completely by dousing it with water or smothering it with sand. This meant that in bad weather, there were no hot meals. You would be back to gnawing on dry, unbroken hardtack and cold salt meat. A miserable experience that made you appreciate Silas's salty stew even more. The location of the galley was a matter of strategic design. It was typically located in the forecastle, the forward part of the ship, often directly on the main deck or just below it. This was to keep the smoke and heat away from the captain's quarters at the stern, and also to ensure that if a fire did break out, the prevailing winds would blow the smoke and flames away from the rest of the ship, giving the crew a better chance to fight. The fuel for the fire was another precious, carefully rationed resource. The ship carried a large supply of firewood and charcoal, stored in a dry, protected part of the hold. Once that ran out, anything combustible might be used. Wood, splintered barrels, broken bits of planking, anything that could burn would eventually find its way into the cook's fire hearth. And here's a weirdly specific and dangerous detail about cooking at sea: the cauldron. The massive copper pot in which the stew was perpetually simmering was not secured in a way we would recognize, while it might be nestled into the hearth. A sudden, violent lurch of the ship during a storm could be enough to tip it over, sending a wave of scalding hot, greasy stew across the galley. Burns were an incredibly common and dangerous injury for ship's cooks. A severe burn in the middle of the ocean, with no access to proper medical care, would almost certainly become infected and could easily be fatal. The cook had to be a master of timing and balance, always aware of the ship's movement. He learned to brace himself against the roll of the waves, to chop his ingredients on a small, secure block, and to keep his knives carefully stowed so they didn't go flying in rough seas. It was less like cooking and more like performing a dangerous, physically demanding dance. Historians who study the design of ships and the daily life of sailors often debate the efficiency and safety of the shipboard galley. Was the open fire hearth a primitive and reckless design, or was it a surprisingly robust and well-adapted solution given the technological constraints of the time? The fact that thousands of ships successfully navigated the globe using this very system for centuries suggests it was, at the very least, functional. But the naval records are also filled with accounts of ships lost to galley fires, a testament to the constant underlying risk. One evening, a sudden squall hits the ship. It heels over sharply. From the galley, you hear a loud crash, followed by a string of curses from Silas that would make a demon blush. A wave has washed over the deck and down the galley hatch, dousing his fire and sending a shower of wet soot and ash everywhere. There will be no hot dinner tonight. The crew grumbles that no one blames the cook. They all understand the precarious nature of his work. You gnaw on your dry hardtack, the taste of salty flour and weevils mingling in your mouth. You look towards the dark, smoky hatch of the galley, not with hunger, but with a new sense of respect. Down there, in that tiny, hot, dangerous box, Silas is not just fighting a losing battle against bad ingredients. He's in a constant struggle against the fundamental forces of nature: the sea, the wind, and the ever-present threat of fire. And the fact that you get any hot food at all is a small, daily miracle. The cold, dark meal of dry hardtack and salty meat does little to lift your spirits. The lack of a crackling fire in the galley makes the ship feel darker, quieter, and in the quiet, you start to notice other sounds. They faint, frantic scratching from within a nearby barrel, a soft, skittering sound from the shadows along the edge of the deck. You've been trying to ignore them, but they are an undeniable part of the ship's soundscape. At night, as you lie in your hammock, you can hear them in the hold below you. A constant, furtive movement. These are the sounds of the ship's other crew, the unticketed passengers who outnumber you and your shipmates by a wide margin, the rats and the insects. The weevils in your biscuits were just the advance guard. The main army resides in the dark, damp corners of the vessel. The ship is a paradise for them. It's a floating fortress of food and shelter. The wooden hull is full of nooks and crannies to build nests. The hold is a smorgasbord of spilled grain, accessible barrels of biscuit, and sacks of oats. It's little wonder that every ship of the era, from the grandest naval man of war to the grubbiest pirate's loop, was massively infested. This is a fundamental historical reality of life on a wooden ship. The rats came aboard in port, scrambling up the thick mooring ropes, and once they were on, they were nearly impossible to get rid of. They bred with astonishing speed. A single pair of rats could, in theory, produce thousands of descendants within a year. At first, you see them only as fleeting shadows, a flick of a tail disappearing behind a coil of rope, but then you start to see the evidence of their work. Null marks on a wooden crate, a small, nibbled hole in a sack of flour, a trickle of white powder dusting the floorboards. The realization dawns on you that they are getting into everything. They are not just eating the food, they are living in it, nesting in it, and fouling it with their droppings. The food doesn't just taste bad, it's profoundly unsanitary. The crew's response to this infestation is one of weary resignation. Some ships had a ship's cat, or more effectively, a terrier, whose primary job was rat catching. But even the most diligent animal could barely make a dent in the population. The pirates mostly just learned to live with them, their disgust slowly eroded by daily exposure. But this coexistence leads to a strange and grim culinary possibility. Here is a weird fact of maritime life in times of desperation. When fresh meat was a distant dream, rats became a source of it. Sailors, and pirates were no exception, would trap and eat the ship's rats. They were often referred to by euphemisms like roof rabbits or sea chickens. They would be skinned, roasted over the fire hearth, and eaten, to a man starved for any meat that wasn't saturated with salt. A roasted rat was a welcome, if stomach-turning, change of pace. The thought that the mystery meat in Silas's stew might one day be supplemented with the very creatures skittering in the hold is a deeply unsettling one. Historians who study disease at sea still debate the precise role of rats in the overall health of a ship's crew, while their connection to the Black Death via fleas was becoming understood. Their role in spreading more common shipboard ailments like dysentery or food poisoning is more complex. How much of the sickness was caused by the direct contamination of food and water by rats, versus the poor quality of the provisions themselves or other unsanitary practices? It was likely a death by 1,000 cuts, a combination of all these factors, with the rats acting as a constant, filthy menace that made a bad situation infinitely worse. Tonight, as you try to sleep, you hear the scratching again, this time seemingly just on the other side of the planking from your head. You pull your rough wool blanket a little tighter. You are not alone in the dark. The ship is teeming with unseen life, and the line between what is considered a pest and what is considered a meal is becoming uncomfortably thin. You try not to think about it, but the thought lingers, scratching away at the edge of your consciousness long after the sound itself has faded. The morning dawns gray and damp. The sea is a choppy, unsettled slate of green, and the mood on the ship is as foul as the weather. Thy hot meal is finally back on the menu, as Silas has managed to coax his fire back to life. He ladles out a familiar-looking stew, and you take your ration of hardtack from the barrel. You've accepted the saltness of the stew and the leathery texture of the meat. You've even come to terms with the slimy, green water. But the bugs in the biscuit are a psychological hurdle you're still trying to clear. The sight of a tiny black weevil crawling out of a piece of your food triggers a primal revulsion that is hard to suppress. You sit down on the deck, your bowl in your lap, and look at the biscuit in your hand. You can see the small, dark holes where the insects have burrowed. You know that for everyone you see, there are dozens of larvae and eggs baked deep within. You look over at a grizzled old pirate sitting near you. A man whose face is a testament to a hard life at sea, his skin light in leather, his eyes narrowed against a lifetime of sun and spray. He sees you staring at your biscuit with a look of profound disgust. He lets out a short, barking laugh. First time with the skipper's passengers, lad, he grunts. He then proceeds to give you a masterclass in the etiquette of eating infested food. This isn't just about practicality, it's about maintaining a sliver of dignity and control in a situation that is fundamentally disgusting. He takes his biscuit and holds it over his tin plate. With the handle of his knife, he gives it a series of sharp, methodical taps. It's not a violent smash, but a controlled percussion. With each tap, a small shower of dust, crumbs, and, yes, a few dark, wriggling specks falls onto his plate. He continues this for a good 30 seconds, turning the biscuit over, tapping all sides, until the rain of passengers has mostly ceased. He then nonchalantly sweeps the debris from his plate overboard, breaks the clean biscuit, and dunks it into his stew. This is the technique you saw before, but now you understand the nuance. It's a ritual. It's a way of saying, I know what's in here, and I am choosing to remove it. It's a small act of defiance against the filth. This brings up a key historical point about the psychology of survival. How did sailors and pirates mentally cope with such a repulsive diet? Part of the answer lies in this kind of gallows humor and ritual. By giving the weevils funny names like passengers or sailor's bread, they defanged the disgust. By creating a ritual for debugging the food, they created an illusion of control and cleanliness, even if they knew it was mostly for show. But what if you were less discerning? Here's a weirdly specific and rather gross fact about weevils. Some sailors claimed they actually improved the hardtack. The argument was that the burrowing of the insects and their larvae would rate the incredibly dense biscuit, making it slightly easier to break and chew. Some even claimed the larvae, when cooked, added a nutty, buttery flavor. Whether this was a genuine culinary opinion or just an extreme form of psychological coping is a matter for debate. You, for one, are not eager to test the theory. Historians who analyze the logbooks and diaries of this era often look for clues about the crew's morale in how they talk about their food. Are the entries filled with angry complaints and threats of mutiny, or do they adopt this kind of grim, humorous tone? The answer often depended on the captain and the circumstances. A well-lit Navy ship might have crews who grumbled but ultimately accepted their lot. A pirate ship, with its volatile and independent-minded crew, might be a different story. Bad food, especially if it was perceived as being unfairly distributed, could be a major source of conflict, easily boiling over into violence. You decide to try the old pirate's method. You hold your biscuit over your bowl and begin to tap. It feels silly at first, but as you see the small specks fall out, you feel a strange sense of satisfaction. It's a tiny victory, but a victory nonetheless. You are not just passively accepting your disgusting meal, you are curating it. You break the cleaned biscuit, drop it into your stew, and take a bite. It still tastes like salty, mushy flour, but in your mind, it's a little bit better. You have separated yourself, just slightly, from the filth. You have learned one of the most important survival skills on the high seas, how to lie to yourself, just enough to make it through the next meal. The water situation has gone from bad to worse. The greenish, slimy liquid you were choking down a few weeks ago now seems like a fond memory. The contents of the water casks are now a thick, brownish sludge that smells like a forgotten swamp. It's undrinkable, even for the most desperate and dire and stomach-kid pirate. The ship is in the grip of a serious water crisis. Morale plummets. A thirsty crew is a surly, undangerous crew. Fights break out over minor slights. The men are listless, their lids cracked, their energy sapped by dehydration. The captain and the quartermaster know they have a serious problem on their hands, one that could threaten the entire voyage, and even led to mutiny. The solution to this crisis comes not from a new barrel of water, but from a different kind of barrel, one that the pirates have been guarding with religious fervor. The rum. This is where you witness the genius and the necessity of one of the most iconic drinks in history, grog. While Admiral Vernon may have formalized it in the Royal Navy, the principle of mixing spirits and water was a long-standing tradition at sea, born of pure necessity. The quartermaster unlocks the spirit room, a secure part of the hold where the ship's most valuable liquid assets are stored. He brings up a cask of dark, pungent Caribbean rum. The smell alone is enough to lift the crew's spirits. Rum was the drink of choice for pirates in the Atlantic. It was cheap, plentiful, and potent, produced in vast quantities on the sugar plantations of the islands they frequented. But the crew is not about to be given free rein to drink pure rum. A ship full of dehydrated, drunken pirates would be uncontrollable and would likely sail itself to the bottom of the ocean. The goal is not to get drunk, the goal is to make the water drinkable and to carefully manage the crew's state of mind. The quartermaster takes a bucket of the foul, sludgy water. Into this, he pours a healthy measure of rum. He might also add a bit of lime juice or brown sugar, if any is available. The lime juice, while they didn't know the exact science, was a crucial addition. Sailors knew from experience that citrus helped ward off the dreaded disease of scurvy. The sugar was simply to make the concoction more palatable. He stirs the mixture with a wooden paddle. This is grog, a simple, yet revolutionary, beverage. The transformation is remarkable. The strong, sweet, and spicy aroma of the rum completely overpowers the swampy smell of the bad water. The dark color of the rum masks the unappetizing brown of the water. The alcohol kills some of the most harmful bacteria, making it safer to consume. And, of course, the alcohol itself provides a welcome and much-needed boost to morale. This is the key historical point about grog and other naval spirits. They weren't just a luxury or a way to get drunk. They were a fundamental tool for survival and shipboard management. Alcohol was a preservative, a disinfectant, a medicine, and a social lubricant all in one. A captain who managed his ship's alcohol supply well was likely to have a healthier and happier crew. Each pirate is given their daily ration. A cup of this new brew. You take a sip. It's still not good, but it's 1,000 times better than the water alone. The fiery kick of the rum and the sweetness of the sugar cut through the vile taste of the water, making it possible to swallow without gagging. You feel the warmth spread through your chest, a welcome sensation that eases the tension in your shoulders. A weird but true fact about rum on these ships: the proof, or strength, of the rum was often tested by mixing it with a little gunpowder. If the damp gunpowder could still be lit, it was considered proof rum, meaning it had a high enough alcohol content, at least 57% ABV. This was a practical way for sailors to ensure they weren't being cheated with watered-down spirits. Historians still debate the overall effect of the daily alcohol ration on sailors. Did it lead to chronic alcoholism and contribute to the brutal discipline and violence common on ships, or was it a necessary evil, a pragmatic solution to the impossible problems of food and water preservation, without which long-distance sea travel would have been even more deadly? The evidence suggests it was both. Grog kept men alive, but it also fueled a culture of heavy drinking that had its own dark consequences. You finish your cup of grog, the world seems a little brighter. The nagging headache from dehydration has eased. The crew is talking and laughing again for the first time in days. The crisis has been averted. For now, you look at the rum barrel with a new sense of reverence. It's not just a cask of alcohol, it's the lifeblood of the ship, a magic elixir that turns poison into sustenance and despair into hope. The grog has solved the immediate crisis of thirst, but it cannot fill an empty stomach. The daily stew seems to get thinner, the chunks of salt horse smaller and more stringy. The hard tack, a constant, unwelcome companion, offers bulk but no satisfaction. A deep, gnawing hunger has settled over the crew, not just for food, but for freshness, for flavor, for anything that doesn't taste of salt, rot, or weevils. You stand at the ship's rail, staring into the deep, hypnotic blue of the open ocean. It seems absurd. You are surrounded by a world teeming with life, yet you are slowly starving. The idea begins as a murmur among the crew, then grows into a chorus. Why are we fishing? It seems like such an obvious solution. The quartermaster, sensing the crew's mood, finally relents. He produces a box of fishing tackle. This is not the elegant gear of a sport fisherman. There are no rods or reels. There are coils of thick, tarred hemp line, a few heavy-laid sinkers, and a collection of large, crude iron hooks, some of them rusted. For bait, Silas offers up a few chunks of the foul-smelling salt pork, the logic being that a hungry fish can't be much pickier than a hungry pirate. A dozen or so men find spots along the rail, bait their hooks, and toss their lines into the sea. A quiet sense of hope settles over the ship. All eyes are on the lines, watching for the telltale jerk and pull. You let your own line out, the heavy sinker pulling it down into the seemingly bottomless depths. And you wait, and wait. The sun beats down, the ship creaks and groans, continuing its steady pace across the waves. An hour passes. Nothing. Another hour. Still nothing. The initial optimism begins to fade, replaced by a familiar sense of disappointment. This is the hard reality of fishing in the open ocean, a key historical point often missed in tales of the sea. The deep ocean is not a giant fish pond. While it contains immense life, it is vast, and that life is spread out. Most of the fish that are easily caught live in the shallower waters near coasts, banks, or reefs. Out here, in the blue desert, catching anything from a moving ship is largely a matter of pure dumb luck. Just as the crew is about to give up, a shout erupts from the stern. Got one. A big one. Everyone rushes to watch. A pirate named Black Bill is straining, his hands raw from the friction of the coarse line pulling through his grip. Two of his mates rush to help him. Then together, they begin the slow, arduous process of hauling the creature from the depths. The excitement is electric. The entire crew gathers, their hunger forgotten for a moment, replaced by the thrill of the hunt. After a 10-minute struggle, they finally haul their catch over the railing onto the deck. It's not a beautiful, silvery tuna or a colorful dolphin fish. It's a shark, a 10-foot shark, thrashing on the deck, its black eyes lifeless, its mouth a terrifying crescent of serrated teeth. The crew cheers. It's meat, fresh meat. Silas the cook emerges from his galley, a meat cleaver in hand, a rare, hungry grin on his face. This brings us to a weird but true fact about sea life. Sailors had a complicated relationship with sharks. They feared and hated them as omens of death and voracious predators that would feast on any man who fell overboard. But that hatred didn't stop them from eating a shark if they were hungry enough. The promise of fresh meat trumped any superstition. Silas gets to work, skillfully butchering the shark, cutting thick, white steaks from its flank. The meat is quickly thrown into the cauldron. For the first time in weeks, the stew that night has an abundance of fresh, plentiful meat. The mood is celebratory. You receive your portion, a large, flaky white steak floating in the familiar salty broth. You take a bite, your mouth watering in anticipation, and the disappointment hits you like a physical blow. The meat is awful. It has a sharp, acrid taste, a chemical bitterness that reminds you of ammonia. It's so foul that you can barely swallow it. You look around and see similar expressions of disgust on the faces of your crewmates. The cook, lacking the culinary knowledge, has fallen victim into a quirk of shark biology. A shark's body fluids contain high concentrations of urea, which breaks down into ammonia after death. To be edible, shark meat must be bled immediately and soaked in brine or milk to leach out the urea. Cyrus, in his haste, simply cooked it, creating a nearly inedible meal. Historians often debate the true contribution of fishing to the maritime diet. Was it a vital source of supplemental nutrition that provided key vitamins and proteins missing from the stored rations, or was its primary value psychological, offering a brief, hopeful distraction from the monotony of the voyage? even if the results were often, quite literally, disgusting. Your experience with the ammonia sharks adjusts the latter. It was a morale boost right up until the moment of consumption. The crew, defeated, takes the foul-tasting shark meat out of their stew. The grand promise of the ocean's bounty has been a bitter failure. The ocean is not a friendly larder. It is a vast, indifferent wilderness that guards its treasures jealously. With a sigh, you go back to soaking your weevil-filled hardtack. It may be disgusting, but at least it tastes predictably of nothing. The foul-tasting shark was a bitter disappointment, but the failed meal is soon overshadowed by a more sinister development. It starts subtly, a quiet complaint here and there. A man named Thomas complains of a deep, aching fatigue in his bones that sleep doesn't seem to cure. Another pirate, a young lad on his first voyage, shows you his arms, pointing out the strange, dark splotches that have appeared on his skin, like old bruises. You feel it in your own body. You're constantly tired. Your muscles feel weak and heavy, as if you're walking through water. A small cut on your hand from a rope a few weeks ago, which should have healed by now, has remained an open, weeping sore. The most alarming symptom appears one morning as you chew on a piece of softened hardtack. You feel a strange tenderness in your gums. You run your tongue over them. They feel soft and spongy. Later in the day, you look at your reflection in a shard of polished metal. Your gums are swollen and have turned a dark, purplish red. When you press on them, a drop of blood oozes out. This is the onset of scurvy. It is the most dreaded and iconic disease of the Age of Sail, a scourge that killed more sailors than all naval battles, storms, and shipwrecks combined. It was a slow, agonizing, and mysterious killer, and it is now beginning its silent, methodical attack on the crew of the Sea Serpent. The historical point here is crucial to understanding this era, and no one knew what caused scurvy. For centuries, doctors and sea captains proposed a host of incorrect theories. Some thought it was caused by the foul air in the ship's hold. Others blamed the damp, cold climate. Some believed it was a result of laziness or poor moral character. The idea that it was a dietary deficiency, specifically a lack of what we now know as vitamin C, was only just beginning to be explored. Without this knowledge, the disease is allowed to run its course. The initial symptoms of fatigue and skin lesions are just the beginning. As the weeks go by, the condition of the crew deteriorates dramatically. The men's gums become so swollen and putrid that their teeth loosen and begin to fall out. The stench of their breath, a condition known as scurvy mouth, is so foul that it's difficult to stand close to them. Old, long-healed wounds mysteriously reopen. A scar from a knife fight years ago might suddenly break open into a fresh, bleeding wound. The men suffer from excruciating pain in their joints and limbs. Their bodies become bloated, their skin a ghastly pale color. In the final stages, they suffer from sudden, spontaneous bleeding from the nose and mouth, followed by convulsions, and finally, death. It is a horrific, drawn-out way to die. Here's a weirdly specific and terrifying symptom of advanced scurvy, a profound psychological despair. Sufferers would be overcome with a deep, paralyzing depression and lethargy. They would lie in their hammocks, unable to move or speak, simply waiting to die. The disease didn't just attack the body, it attacked the will to live. As the first man on your ship succumbs to the disease, a palpable fear grips the crew. This is not a swift, violent death from a cannonball or a fall from the rigging. This is a slow, creeping decay from within. The pirates, who fear no man and no storm, are terrified of this invisible enemy. Historians who study the history of medicine often point to the long, slow discovery of a cure for scurvy as a major case study in the development of scientific methodology. While a Scottish naval surgeon named James Lind famously conducted a clinical trial in 1747 that proved the effectiveness of citrus fruits, his findings were not widely adopted for nearly 50 years. The great explorers like Captain Cook were among the first to successfully combat scurvy on long voyages by forcing their crews to eat things like sauerkraut and a portable soup made of boiled down vegetable matter. But for a scruffy pirate crew in the 1722, this knowledge is still in the future. Your own body feels like it's betraying you. The simple act of climbing a rope ladder leaves you breathless. The salty stew, once just unpleasant, is now an agony to eat with your sore, bleeding gums. You look at the faces of your shipmates. They are no longer the boisterous, fearless rogues who signed on for a life of adventure. They are hollow-eyed, gaunt figures, shuffling around the deck like ghosts. The dream of gold has been replaced by a much more primal desire, the desperate, all-consuming need for a single piece of fresh fruit. You now understand that the greatest treasure the ocean hides is not a chest of gold, but a simple, life-giving orange. The shadow of scurvy has fallen over the ship, a creeping dread that has sapped the strength and spirit of the crew. The men are weak, their bodies aching, their minds clouded with a grim lethargy. The captain knows that if he doesn't find a source of fresh food soon, his pirate crew will be too sick to fight, too weak to even sail the ship. The voyage will end not in a blaze of glory, but in a slow, floating death. Then, one morning, the lookout's cry electrifies the ship. It's not sail, ho. It's land, ho. It's a small, low-lying island, a smudge of green on the horizon. But more importantly, as you get closer, you see the telltale signs on its sandy beaches, dark, moving shapes. They are sea turtles, hundreds of them, crawling ashore to lay their eggs. A wave of desperate energy surges through the crew. This is not just land, it's a larder. Sea turtles were the 18th century equivalent of a floating supermarket for any ship lucky enough to find them. This is a vital historical point about survival at sea. Turtles were godsend. They were large, easy to catch, and, most importantly, they could be kept alive on the ship for weeks or even months with minimal care. They were a source of fresh meat that didn't need to be salted. The ship drops anchor in the calm water of a turquoise bay. The longboats are lowered, and a shore party is assembled. It's not the strongest pirates who go, but those who still have enough strength to row and walk. You are among them. As your boat scrapes against the white sand, the scale of the opportunity becomes clear. The beach is covered in the tracks of giant green sea turtles. You and the other pirates spread out. The method for capturing them is simple and brutally effective. You find a large female, weighing perhaps 200 or 300 pounds, who has just finished laying her eggs. You get on one side of her, and another pirate gets on the other. Then, with a coordinated heave, you flip her on to her back. Once she's on her back, she is helpless. Her flippers wave uselessly in the air. She can right herself. She is now a living, breathing, but completely immobilized source of future meals. The pirates work their way down the beach, flipping turtle after turtle. It feels less like hunting and more like harvesting. The longboats make several trips, ferrying the helpless, overturned turtles back to the sea serpent. On deck, they are laid out in rows, still on their backs, their flippers occasionally twitching. It's a strange and somewhat pathetic sight. These ancient, majestic sea creatures, now reduced to living pantry items. A weird but true fact about keeping turtles on board: sailors believed that turtles didn't need food or water to survive. They thought the turtles could live for months on nothing but the air. While they are incredibly hardy, they do, of course, need sustenance. The captured turtles were essentially starving and dehydrating to death on the deck of the ship, a process that could take many weeks. The effect on the crew's morale is instantaneous and profound. The despair of scurvy is replaced by the jubilant promise of fresh meat. That very night, Silas the cook gets to work. He butchers one of the smaller turtles. The process is a gory spectacle, but no one turns away. They watch with hungry eyes. Turtle meat was considered a delicacy. It was often described as tasting like a combination of beef, chicken, and veal. Silas prepares it in every way he can. He makes a rich, Savory stewed turtle soup from the meat and the gelatinous fat called kale passion kale pea. He roasts steaks from the flippers over his fire hearth. He even collects the turtle's blood, mixing it with flour and spices to make a primitive, protein-rich blood pudding. The crew feasts. For the first time in months, you eat meat that is tender, flavorful, and not saturated with salt. It's the most delicious thing you have ever tasted. You eat until your stomach hurts, a feeling you had long forgotten. Historians who study maritime diets emphasize the critical role of the sea turtle. For pirates and buccaneers operating in the Caribbean and the Atlantic, turtles were a reliable and essential food source that allowed them to stay at sea for extended periods. The Cayman Islands, for example, were originally named Las Tortugas by Columbus because of the immense number of turtles there, and they became a favorite provisioning spot for generations of sailors. The fresh meat, rich in nutrients, begins to work its magic on the crew's ailing bodies, while it doesn't contain the massive amounts of vitamin C needed to fully cure scurvy. The high-quality protein and other vitamins provide a much-needed boost. The men's spirits lift. The color returns to their faces. The ship, which was a floating hospital war just days ago, feels alive again. You look at the rows of overturned turtles on the deck. They are your salvation. They are a brutal, but effective, solution to the slow death that was creeping over the ship. You have found treasure, not of gold, but of flesh and blood. The turtle feast has restored a semblance of health and vigor to the crew, but the underlying problem remains. The ship's stores are critically low. The hardtack is nearly gone. The salt meat barrels are empty, and the water casks contain nothing but brown sludge. The captain decides to stay anchored at the island for a few days to rest the crew and, more importantly, to forage for anything and everything that might be edible. You are part of a foraging party sent ashore, armed not with cutlasses and pistols, but with empty sacks and a desperate sense of hope. The island, which looked like a green paradise from the ship, is a tangled, humid, and vaguely threatening jungle up close. The air is thick with the buzzing of insects and the calls of strange birds. Your mission: find food and, just as importantly, find fresh water. The search for water is the first priority. You follow a dry, rocky channel inland, and after an hour of trekking through the thick undergrowth, you hear the sound of trickling water. You find a small, clear stream running down from the island's central hills. The water is cool, clean, and sweet. You and the other pirates fall to your knees, drinking directly from the stream, burying your faces in the life-giving water. It's a moment of pure, primal bliss. The casks are brought ashore, cleaned of their foul slime, and refilled with this precious, untainted water. With the water crisis solved, the hunt for food begins in earnest. This is a crucial historical aspect of long-distance voyages. A ship's crew had to be opportunistic and versatile foragers. Their survival often depended on their ability to identify and procure food from unfamiliar environments. Your party splits up. One group combs the shoreline at low tide. They return with sacks full of oysters, mussels, and clams, which they pry from the rocks. They also manage to catch a few crabs scuttling in the shallows. It's a bounty of fresh seafood, a welcome change from the endless cycle of preserved meat. Another group, armed with clubs, heads for a noisy seabird rookery on a rocky cliff. The birds, having little fear of humans, are easy prey. The pirates wade into the colony, clubbing dozens of nesting birds and gathering their eggs. The eggs are a particularly valuable prize, a perfect, self-contained package of protein and fat. You are part of a group tasked with exploring the island's interior, looking for edible plants. This is the most dangerous and uncertain job. The island is full of strange fruits and roots you've never seen before. Some might be delicious and nutritious. Others might be deadly poisonous. You rely on a crude form of trial and error. The old pirate leading your group, a man who has been shipwrecked twice, has a few rules of thumb. Avoid anything with a milky sap. Be wary of brightly colored berries. If the birds are eating it, it's probably safe, but that's no guarantee. Here's a weird but true fact about this process. Sailors would sometimes use a taste test on a new plant. A man would touch a small piece to his lip. If there was no burning or numbness, he would touch it to his tongue. If that was fine, he would chew a tiny piece and spit it out. Finally, he would swallow a minuscule amount and wait for several hours. If he didn't get sick or die, the plant was declared edible. It was a slow, terrifying, and incredibly risky way to build a botanical database. You discover a patch of what look like wild yams. You dig up the starchy tubers. You find a tree laden with a small, green fruit that tastes like a sour lime, a potential goldmine of the anti-scurvy magic you so desperately need. You also find coconut palms, and after a few clumsy attempts, you manage to knock some down. The coconut water inside is refreshing, and the rich, fatty meat is a dense source of calories. By the end of the day, the various parties reassemble on the beach. The haul is impressive. You have sacks of shellfish, birds, roots, and fruits. You have turned this wild, unknown island into your own personal grocery store. Historians who study pirate logistics debate how much of their provisioning came from organized purchase, import versus opportunistic foraging like this. The evidence suggests it was a mix of both. Pirates were masters of improvisation. They had to be. Their entire lifestyle was one of taking advantage of unexpected opportunities, whether that was a slow-moving merchant ship or an island teeming with unsuspecting turtles and birds. That night, you have a feast on the beach. A massive bonfire crackles, its light dancing on the faces of the crew. You roast birds and crabs over the open flame. You boil the yams and shellfish in a cauldron of fresh, clean water. You drink the sweet milk from the coconuts. It's a meal born of desperation and hard work, and it tastes better than any banquet you could imagine. You are not just surviving, you are thriving, living off the land like the adventurers you always dreamed of being. For a brief, golden moment, the pirate life is everything you hoped it would be. The island has been a lifesaver, a green oasis that has replenished your water, your food stores, and your spirits. The crew is healthier and stronger than they've been in months. But you are pirates, not farmers. The goal is not to live off the land, the goal is to plunder the sea. With the ship provisioned and the men rested, you weigh anchor and set sail again, your eyes scanning the horizon for a different kind of prey. A few days later, the lookout's cry rings out, the one every pirate longs to hear sail. Ho! On the horizon is a fat, slow-moving merchant vessel, low in the water, a sure sign that its hold is heavy with cargo. The sea serpent gives chase. Your ship, built for speed and aggression, easily closes the distance. The mood on board transforms. The lazy camaraderie of the island gives way to a tense, professional focus. Cannons are loaded. Grappling hooks are made ready. Cutlasses are sharpened. The merchant ship, seeing the black flag in the determined pursuit, makes a fateful decision. It surrenders without a fight. This was a common and wise choice. A merchant crew is no match for a hardened pirate crew, and resistance usually only lead to bloodshed. You and a boarding party swarm onto the deck of the captured vessel. The merchant sailors, their faces pale with fear, offer no resistance. Your captain and the quartermaster immediately begin the process of interrogation and inventory. What is the cargo? Where is the strong cuts? But for the average pirate, like you, the first priority is not the silk, the spices, or even the gold. The first priority is the ship's pantry. You and a few others head straight for the merchantman's galleon storerooms. What you find feels like discovering El Dorado. This ship, having recently left a major colonial port, is stocked with luxuries you had only dreamed of. There are crates of fresh vegetables, potatoes, carrots, and cabbages. There are nets of onions and garlic. Most incredibly, there is a small coop in the back with a dozen plump, healthy chickens. This is the ultimate prize. A key historical point is that for a pirate crew suffering from the abysmal standard sea diet, the most valuable part of any prize was often its food stores. The gold and silver could be divided later, but the fresh food was a treasure to be consumed immediately. The chickens are the crown jewels. They are immediately liberated and handed over to Silas. That night, the smell of roasting chicken once again fills the air, a scent so delicious and rare that it feels like a religious experience. You are served a generous portion of tender, juicy meat. It's not just food, it's a symbol of your victory, the literal spoils of war. You gnaw on a chicken leg with a satisfaction that no amount of gold could provide. The rest of the merchant's larder is plundered with equal enthusiasm. Sacks of fine white flour, a world away from your course. Brown ship's flour, I brought aboard, tins of real coffee, bags of sugar, and even a few jars of jam are discovered and cheered like major triumphs. Here's a weirdly specific detail about this process. Pirates were often more interested in mundane supplies than in treasure. They would meticulously plunder a ship, not just for its cargo, but for its spare sails, its coils of rope, its barrels of tar, and its tools. They would even take the ship's candles and medical supplies. A captured ship was like a floating hardware store and supermarket, and pirates were voracious shoppers who never had to pay. Historians who analyze the economics of piracy often debate what constituted a successful prize. Was it the ships laden with gold from the Spanish Main, the stuff of legend, or was it the more common, everyday merchant vessels, whose cargo of sugar, tobacco, and dry goods was less glamorous but more easily sold, and whose pantries provided the immediate and tangible reward of a full belly for the crew living day to day? The capture of a well-stocked merchantman like this one was a victory in every sense of the word. As you sit on the deck, your stomach full of chicken and your spirits high, you finally understand the core appeal of the pirate's life. It's not just about the freedom or the vague promise of distant treasure. It's about these moments of sudden, overwhelming abundance. It's about the power to simply take what you need, to seize a life of comfort and plenty from a world that had previously offered you nothing but hardship. One minute you are starving, eating weevils and leather. The next, you are feasting on roast chicken. This exhilarating, unpredictable swing from famine to feast is the heart of the pirate's gamble. And tonight, the gamble has paid off handsomely. The captured merchant ship has been a boon, its larder providing a welcome reprieve from the grim realities of your own pantry. But the greatest prize, the one that sends a ripple of genuine, unrestrained joy through the crew, is discovered deep in the captain's personal stores. It's a small collection of wooden crates containing not just rum, but fine Madeira wine, French brandy, and even a few bottles of sparkling champagne. For a crew accustomed to weak beer and watered-down grog, this is the equivalent of striking the mother lode. The reaction is immediate and explosive. The unwritten rules of shipboard decorum, already loose on a pirate vessel, evaporate completely. The captain, knowing he can't stop the inevitable, declares a celebration. This is a key historical insight into pirate life. The rhythm of their existence was not a steady line, but a series of sharp peaks and troughs. Long periods of boredom and deprivation were punctuated by moments of intense, wild celebration, usually fueled by a captured supply of alcohol. The scene on the deck of the Sea Serpent descends into what can only be described as organized chaos. The fine brandy is not savored in delicate glasses, it's drunk straight from the bottle, passed from hand to hand. The Madeira is poured into tin cups, gulped down like water. A bottle of champagne is opened with a cutlass, its precious contents spraying over the deck, to the roaring approval of the men. Music erupts. A pirate who owns a fiddle, an instrument he guards more closely than his own life, perches on a cannon and begins to play a series of lively, foot-stomping jigs. The men, their bellies full of chicken and their heads full of brandy, begin to dance. It's not an elegant affair. It's a wild, clumsy, joyous expression of pure release. Men dance with men, spinning and stomping on the wooden deck. their heavy boots pounding out a rhythm that matches the fiddler's frantic bowing. The noise is deafening. Shouts, laughter, and sea shanties, sung with more enthusiasm than skill, fill the night air. The more reserved pirates sit in groups, telling stories that grow more extravagant with each drink. The ship's carpenter and the grizzled old gunner engage in a friendly, drunken wrestling match that ends with both of them collapsing in a heap, laughing breathlessly. Here's a peculiar but telling detail about these celebrations. They were one of the few times that the strict hierarchy of the ship would temporarily dissolve. The captain might share a drink with the lowest cabin boy. The quartermaster might lose a friendly game of cards to a common sailor. This temporary flattening of the social structure was a vital safety valve, a way to release the tensions that inevitably built up in the close, confined quarters of a ship. However, these drunken revels were also incredibly dangerous. A ship full of intoxicated pirates was a floating accident waiting to happen. A man could easily get into a drunken argument that escalated to knives, or stumble and fall from the rigging into the dark sea below. A dropped torch could set the ship ablaze. This is a subject of debate among historians. How did pirate captains manage these outbursts? Did they encourage them as a necessary release of steam, a way to keep morale high, or did they try to control them? Understanding the immense risk they pose to the ship and the voyage, the answer likely varies. A shrewd captain like Blackbeard was known to maintain a fearsome discipline, while others, like Calico Jack Rackham, were infamous for the constant state of drunkenness on their ships. The most successful captains probably found a balance, allowing the crew their moment of release, but ensuring a few sober hands were always on watch. You find yourself caught up in the joyous anarchy. You share a bottle of wine with a man you were ready to fight with over a piece of hardtack just a few weeks ago. You try to sing along to a shanty whose words you don't fully know. The hardships of the voyage, the scurvy, the thirst, the hunger all melt away in the warm haze of alcohol and camaraderie. For a few hours, you are not just a crew, you are a brotherhood, united in Victorian celebration. You are living the pirate dream, not of gold, but of complete and utter freedom from the rules and worries of the world. The consequences, the hangovers, the dangers, they are all problems for tomorrow. Tonight, you are just a man with a full belly, a cup of fine brandy, and a sky full of stars above a ship that feels, for this one perfect moment, like the center of the universe. The morning after the celebration dawns with a collective, throbbing headache. The deck is littered with the evidence of the previous night's debauchery: empty bottles, discarded food, and a few pirates still sleeping where they collapsed. A sense of groggy reality returns. It's time for breakfast, and the familiar, unappetizing smell of boiling salt meat begins to drift from the galley. You take your place in line, your head pounding, and receive your portion of stew and a biscuit. You find a spot to sit and prepare to eat. You pull the knife from the sheath at your belt, the same knife you use to cut rope, mend sails, and clean your fingernails. You spear a piece of the tough meat and bring it to your mouth. It's in this simple, mundane act that you're reminded of a fundamental aspect of life at sea: the almost complete lack of dedicated eating utensils. This single, all-purpose knife is your spoon, your fork, and your primary tool for consuming food. This is a key historical detail that paints a vivid picture of the pirates' world. Forks, while they existed in the homes of the wealthy on land, were not common items on a ship, especially not a pirate ship. They were seen as flimsy, unnecessary, and even slightly effeminate. The man had a knife. That was all he needed. This reliance on a single tool had a profound effect on how you ate. You couldn't gracefully spear a small pea. You couldn't delicately twirl a piece of meat. Eating was a robust, physical act. You used the point of your knife to stab a chunk of meat from your bowl. For more liquid stews, you would use a piece of hardtack as an edible spoon, a trencher to scoop up the broth, or you would simply lift the wooden bowl to your lips and drink the contents like a thick, savory soup. Table manners, as you would know them, were non-existent. The deck was your dining table. Your lap was your napkin. You ate quickly and efficiently, driven by hunger and the need to get back to your duties. The concept of a leisurely meal was a forgotten luxury. And here's a weirdly specific social convention that arose from this practice: the point-down rule. In the close, often tense quarters of a ship, it was considered extremely bad manners, and even a sign of aggression, to gesture with your knife or to lay it on the table with the point facing your neighbor. A man's knife was always to be respected. When not in use, it was kept in hand with the point down, or tucked safely back in its sheath. A pointed knife could easily be misinterpreted as a threat, and misunderstandings on a pirate ship had a tendency to escalate quickly. The knife itself was a sailor's most personal and prized possession. It was not a weapon. Primarily, it was a tool. A good sailor's knife had a strong, thick blade, useful for heavy-duty cutting, and often a squared-off or sheep's foot tip, which was less likely to accidentally puncture a sail or a shipmate if the user slipped on a rolling deck. Pirates, being former sailors, would have carried a similar style of knife, though many also favored a point-ear tip for its potential use in a fight. Historians who study the material culture of sailors debate the significance of this shared, utilitarian object. Did the universal reliance on a single knife foster a sense of shared identity and equality among the crew, a kind of brotherhood of the blade, or was the quality and ornamentation of a man's knife a subtle indicator of his status and wealth? You might see a common sailor with a simple wooden-handled knife, while a more successful pirate might have one with a handle of carved bone or inlaid silver, a small but significant display of his success. You look at your own knife. The blade is stained and nicked from weeks of hard use. The handle is worn smooth from your grip. It feels like an extension of your own hand. It has opened barrels, cut you free from a tangled rope, and now it is delivering this salty, unappetizing piece of meat to your mouth. It's a symbol of your new life, a life that is rough, practical, and stripped of all non-essential refinements. There is no room for forks on the high seas. There is only work, survival, and the simple, brutal efficiency of a sharpened piece of steel. The euphoria from the captured prize has faded, replaced by the familiar, monotonous routine of life at sea. The fine wines and fresh chickens are gone, and you're back to a diet of grog, hardtack, and the dregs of the captured ship's salt meat stores. A new tension is creeping into the crew. Rations are getting smaller, and the men are beginning to cast suspicious eyes on one another. Is everyone getting their fair share? This is where you see another crucial, and perhaps surprising, aspect of pirate life come into play: the law. Not the law of kings and governors, but the pirate's own legal code. The articles of agreement that you signed before the voyage began. One evening, as the quartermaster is doling out the evening rum ration, a pirate named One-Eyed Jack accuses him of giving a slightly larger portion to one of his friends. The accusation hangs in the air, thick and dangerous. In the brutal world of a merchant ship or a navy vessel, such an accusation would be met with a flogging. Here, something different happens. The captain calls a meeting. The entire crew gathers on the main deck. The quartermaster and One-Eyed Jack are brought to the center. The captain unrolls a weathered piece of parchment. This is the ship's articles, the pirate code. This is a vital historical point. Pirate ships were not anarchic mobs. They were highly organized, self-governing democracies. The articles, drawn up and agreed to by the entire crew, laid out the rules for everything from the division of plunder to the punishment for crimes. And a significant portion of every pirate code was dedicated to one thing: the fair and equal distribution of food and drink. The articles would state, in no uncertain terms, that every man on the ship was entitled to an equal share of all fresh provisions and strong liquors. This was a radical departure from the class-based system of the Navy, where the officers feasted while the common sailors starved. On the pirate ship, the captain himself was entitled to no more food or drink than the newest cabin boy. The quartermaster, the man elected by the crew, was responsible for upholding this rule. His job was to ensure absolute fairness. If there was only one biscuit left, it would be split equally among all hands. If a cask of wine was captured, every man would receive an identical ration. This principle of equal shares was the bedrock of pirate society. The trial is a simple, direct affair. One-eyed Jack makes his accusation. The quartermaster denies it, explaining his method of measurement. Other men who were nearby are called to give their account. There are no lawyers, no complex procedures. It is a jury of your peers, in the truest sense. After a few minutes of testimony and debate, the crew votes. In this case, they find in favor of the quartermaster. Jack is warned against making false accusations again. The matter is settled. Justice, swift and democratic, has been served. Here's a weirdly specific detail from some surviving pirate articles. Like those of Bartholomew Black, Bart Roberts, The Rules for Onboard Gambling. The articles oft unstated that men could play for money, but not on credit. All gambling debts had to be settled on the spot. This was to prevent the kind of simmering resentments and violent disputes that could arise from unpaid debts, which could tear a crew apart. It was another clever bit of social engineering designed to maintain harmony. Historians have long debated the true nature of these pirate codes. Were they genuinely democratic and egalitarian documents, representing a radical proto-socialist rebellion against the oppressive hierarchies of the time, or were they simply pragmatic contracts, designed by criminals to maximize the efficiency of their criminal enterprise by minimizing internal conflict? The truth is likely a combination of both. The pirates were driven by self-interest, but their shared experience of oppression in the Navy and merchant service had given them a deep-seated belief in the principles of fairness, liberty, and equal representation. As the crew disperses, you feel a renewed sense of stability. Life is hard, the food is terrible, and the future is uncertain. But there is a structure here. There are rules, and those rules apply to everyone equally. You may be an outlaw in the eyes of the world, but on this small, floating patch of wood, you are a citizen with rights. And one of those inalienable rights is your equal share of the rum. It might not be a lot, but by God, it's exactly as much as everyone else is getting. Weeks of hard sailing have taken their toll not just on the crew, but on the ship itself. The Sea Serpent S-hull is leaking more than usual, and its bottom is covered in a thick, shaggy beard of barnacles and seaweed. This marine growth is a major problem. It creates immense drag, slowing the ship down and making it less nimble in a chase. The captain makes a decision it's time to careen the vessel. Careening is a monumental and risky undertaking, but a necessary one for any ship that spends a long time at sea. The process involves deliberately running the ship aground on a sandy beach at high tide, or finding a secluded, protected cove. As the tide goes out, the ship is left resting on its side, exposing one half of its hull. The crew finds a perfect spot, a hidden bay on an uninhabited island, its entrance protected by a reef. The ship is carefully maneuvered onto the beach. As the water recedes, the sea serpent groans and settles into the sand at a steep, unnatural angle. The deck is now a sharp slope, making it almost impossible to walk on. For the next few days, the ship will not be your home, the beach will be. This is a key historical point. Careening was a period of extreme vulnerability. The ship was immobilized, its cannons useless. The crew was exposed and on land. A pirate crew had to be absolutely certain that their chosen careen age was secret and defensible. If a Navy patrol or rival pirate crew were to discover them in this state, it would mean certain doom. But this period of vulnerability is also a period of unexpected culinary opportunity. While one part of the crew gets to work on the hull, scraping off the barnacles, burning away the seaweed with torches, and raycocking the seams with oak almond, the rest of the crew is tasked with hunting and foraging. The focus of this hunt is the shoreline itself, the shallow, sunlit waters of the bay and the rich, Muddy sand exposed by the low tide are a treasure trove of shellfish. You and the other pirates, armed with buckets and small shovels, wade into the shallows. It's an absolute bonanza. The rocks are encrusted with thick clusters of oysters. You use your knife to pry them loose, shucking and eating them right there on the spot. The taste of the fresh, salty, briny meat, an explosion of flavor after weeks of preserved food. You dig in the wets and then find clams by the dozen. You find conches, whelks, and other edible snails in the tidal pools. For a few days, you live on a diet composed almost entirely of fresh seafood. Silas sets up a temporary kitchen on the beach. He builds a large fire pit and places a grill made of green wood over it. You roast oysters until they pop open, their liquor sizzling on the hot coals. You steam clams and mussels in a cauldron of seawater. You feast like kings. A weird but true fact about this process: the sheer amount of shellfish consumed could create a massive historical footprint. Archaeologists have been able to identify ancient pirate Korean age sites in places like Panama and Madagascar by the enormous mounds of discarded oyster and clam shells found on the beaches, some of them several feet thick. These shell middens are a direct, physical record of these temporary seafood feasts. Historians debate the overall health benefits of this sudden glut of shellfish. On one hand, it provided a massive and much-needed infusion of fresh protein, zinc, iron, and other minerals. On the other hand, consuming vast quantities of potentially contaminated shellfish from unfamiliar waters also carried the risk of food poisoning and other illnesses. But for a crew suffering from the long-term effects of a poor diet, it was a risk they were more than willing to take. At the end of each day's hard work on the hull, the crew gathers around the bonfire on the beach. The mood is relaxed and productive. The ship is being repaired. Your bellies are full, and your feet are on solid ground for the first time in months. The familiar, cramped world of the ship has been replaced by the open air and the vastness of the beach. After a few days, the first side of the hull is finished. At the next high tide, the ship is refloated, turned around, and beached again to expose the other side. The whole process is repeated. When the work is finally done, the sea serpent is clean, watertight, and fast again. The crew, rested and well-fed, is ready for the sea. You take one last look at the beach, at the massive pile of empty shells glinting in the sun. It's a monument to your brief, glorious, and delicious day. The ship may be your home, but for a few days, this island was your kitchen. The ship is clean, fast, and back on the trail. The memory of the fresh shellfish feast lingers, a pleasant ghost on your palate, but the reality of the daily rations is setting in again. The crew is on the lookout for another prize, another opportunity. You are cruising in the warm, placid waters of the Caribbean, a region known for its rich trade routes and, as you're about to discover, its strange and wonderful wildlife. One afternoon, the lookout, perched high on the mainmast, doesn't shout about a sail or land. He points, his voice filled with a strange mix of excitement and confusion. What in blazes is that? The crew gathers at the rail. In the calm, shallow water of the port bow, a small group of bizarre creatures is slowly grazing on a bed of seagrass. They are massive, gray, and blubber-white, with paddle-like tails and gentle, whiskered faces that look vaguely like a cow's. They move with a slow, dreamlike grace, completely oblivious to the ship full of hungry pirates bearing down on them. You are looking at a herd of manatees, or as they were often called in the 17th and 18th centuries, sea cows. For a pirate crew, this is an incredible stroke of luck. This is a key historical point to sailors of this era. Manatees and their larger Pacific cousins, the dugongs, were not seen as the gentle, endangered creatures we know today. They were seen as a source of food, a massive, slow-moving, and ridiculously easy to catch source of food. The long boats are lowered with a quiet efficiency. There is no need for a chase. The pirates row up to the placid, grazing animals, The manatees, having no natural predators, show little fear. The men use harpoons and nets to capture one of the larger animals, a creature weighing close to 1,000 pounds. The struggle is brief and one-sided. The captured manatee is wrestled alongside the ship and, with a great of effort, hauled onto the deck with ropes and pulleys. It's a strange, magnificent, and slightly sad sight. The crew gathers around, marveling at the sheer size of their prize. Silas, the cook, is ecstatic. This is more fresh meat than he has seen in his entire career, all in one convenient, blubber-white package. He sharpens his knives and gets to work. The meat of the manatee was highly prized by sailors, buccaneers, and settlers in the Caribbean. It was said to have a unique quality. Different parts of the animal reportedly tasted like different land animals. The red muscle meat was said to be indistinguishable from beef. The whiter meat allegedly tasted like pork, and the tail, fatty and gelatinous, was considered a delicacy that tasted like veal. A single manatee was a floating butcher shop, offering a variety of flavors and textures. Here's a weird but true fact about this maritime menu item: the connection between manatees and mermaids. It's believed that lonely, tired, and perhaps slightly hallucinating sailors, seeing these gentle, whiskered faces and vaguely humanoid forms from a distance, may have mistaken them for the mythical mermaids of legend. The scientific name for their order, Sirenia, is a direct reference to the sirens of Greek mythology. It's a strange thought that the beautiful, seductive mermaid of sailors' dreams was, in reality, 1,000-pound sea cow. The feast that night is legendary. Silas prepares the manatee meat in a dozen different ways. There are thick, beef-like steaks roasted over the fire hearth. There are chunks of pork-like meat simmered into a rich, savory stew. The fat is rendered down and used for frying. A clean, high-quality cooking oil that is a world away from the foul-smelling slush from the salt meat cauldron. You are served a plate piled high with this strange, delicious meat. You take a bite of the beef steak. It is tender and rich. You try the pork stew. It is succulent and flavorful. It's a culinary miracle. Historians who study the environmental impact of this era point to the hunting of manatees and sea turtles as a major factor in their declining populations. For centuries, these animals were a reliable and easily exploited resource. But the intense pressure from shipping, settlement, and hunting eventually drove them to the brink of extinction. The pirates of the sea serpent are not thinking about ecology, they are simply taking advantage of the incredible bounty that the natural world, at that time, still offered. You eat until you can eat no more, your belly full of the strange, delicious meat of the sea cow. You are living in a unique historical moment, a time when the oceans were so full of life that you could simply stumble upon a feast of this magnitude. It's a bounty that seems endless, but like the age of piracy itself, it is a resource that is being consumed far faster than it can be replaced. The memory of the manatee feast is a high point, a rare moment of abundance and good fortune. But the sea is a fickle provider. The weeks that follow are lean. No prizes are taken. No game is caught. The ship's stores dwindle again, this time to near zero. You are down to the last barrel of moldy hardtack and the final, putrid dregs of the water casks. The crew, once strong and confident, is now gaunt, desperate, and haunted by the specter of starvation. The ship is becalmed, trapped in the windless, the oppressive heat of the doldrums. The sails hang limp. The sea is a flat, glassy mirror, reflecting a merciless, white-hot sun. There is no escape. The ship is a floating prison, and your sentence is to slowly waste away. The mood on board is dark and grim. The usual camaraderie is gone, replaced by a sullen, watchful silence. The men eye each other with a new, terrifying calculation in their gaze. When the last of the food is gone, what happens next? This is when the old, unspoken taboo begins to surface in hushed, fearful whispers. It's a topic no sailor wants to discuss, but every sailor knows exists. It is the grim, final resort of a starving crew, the custom of the sea. The custom of the sea was a brutal, unwritten law that dictated what to do when a ship's crew was faced with certain death from starvation. It was a macabre, yet strangely orderly, form of survival cannibalism. This is a dark, but essential, historical point. In the direst of circumstances, when all hope was lost, the crew would resort to sacrificing one of their own to feed the others. The process was not a chaotic, frenzied murder. It was often a chillingly democratic and ritualized affair. The crew would gather, and they would draw lots. Slits of paper, or sticks of different lengths, would be prepared. The man who drew the short straw was the one to be sacrificed. He had lost the lottery of life. The execution was usually carried out by the ship's cook or butcher, the men with the necessary tools and skills. The act was performed as quickly and mercifully as possible. The victim's body would then be butchered, his flesh rationed out among the surviving crewmen, and his blood collected to be drunk. It was a horrific, but in their desperate logic, necessary act. The one had died so that the many might live. On the become deck of the sea serpent, the unspoken tension is unbearable. The captain and quartermaster know that if a wind doesn't rise soon, they will be forced to confront this terrible custom. Here's a weirdly specific and chilling detail about this process: the cabin boy. In many recorded instances of the custom of the sea, the cabin boy, the youngest and lowest ranking member of the crew, was often exempt from the initial lottery. However, if he was the one chosen by the lots, he was not spared. There are also darker accounts where, instead of drawing lots, the crew simply chose the person they deemed most expendable, who was often the cabin boy. Historians and legal scholars have long debated the standing of the custom of the sea. Was it a legitimate, if horrifying, act of necessity, a kind of battlefield triage applied to a survival situation, or was it simply murder? Famous legal cases, like the 19th century British case of R.V. Dudley and Stevens, grappled with this very question. In that case, two shipwrecked sailors who killed and ate their cabin boy were convicted of murder, setting a legal precedent that necessity was not a defense for taking an innocent life. But for centuries before that, out on the lawless expanse of the ocean, the custom was a grim and accepted reality. You look around at your crewmates, men you have fought alongside, drunk with, and shared your life with. You see them not as friends, but as a collection of potential meals, and you know that they are looking at you in the same way. The bonds of fellowship have been stripped away by starvation, leaving only the raw, animal instinct to survive. Just as the captain is about to call the crew together to discuss the unthinkable, a faint breeze ripples across the surface of the water. It's a whisper of wind, but it's enough. A collective, breathless sigh of relief passes through the crew. The sails begin to stir, then to fill. The ship is moving. You are saved, not by a prize or a turtle, but by a breath of air. The immediate crisis is over. The dark custom will not be enacted today, but the experience has left a permanent scar on your soul. You have looked into the abyss, into the darkest corner of human survival, and you have seen the terrible, desperate choices that men are capable of when pushed to the absolute limit. You will never look at your shipmates, or at a simple meal, in the same way again. The wind that saved you from the brink of the unthinkable continues to blow, carrying the sea serpent out of the dreaded doldrums and back into the main shipping lanes. Hope, which had been all but extinguished, flickers back to life. A few days later, your luck turns. You capture a small, unassuming merchant brig. It's not a rich prize, carrying a mundane cargo of timber, but its hold contains something that, to your starving crew, is more precious than gold food. The pirates swarm the captured ship's larder. They find a few barrels of salt beef and a small store of biscuits, which are seized with gratitude. But they also find something else. Tucked away in a corner of the storeroom, a large, wax-coated reel of cheese. It's not a soft, fresh cheese. This is our ship's cheese. A hard, aged cheese like a Cheshire or a Gloucester, designed for longevity. It's dense, crumbly, and has a pungent, sharp smell that tells of a long maturation process. Silas the cook takes a large knife and, with considerable effort, cuts a wedge from the massive wheel. He passes out small chunks to the crew. You take your piece. It's a pale, orangish color and so hard that it feels like a rock in your hand. This is the cheese equivalent of hardtack. You try to bite into it. It's a mistake. The cheese is incredibly dense and firm. Then your teeth, still tender from the early stages of scurvy, ache in protest. You learn, once again by observing the veterans, that the only way to eat this cheese is to shave off thin slivers with your knife. You carefully shave a small piece and place it in your mouth. The flavor is intense. It's incredibly salty, with a sharp, tangy, almost acidic bite that makes your tongue tingle. It's not a pleasant, creamy flavor. It's a powerful, concentrated taste, a testament to its age and dryness. This is a key historical point about provisions at sea. Cheese was a vital source of protein and fat for sailors. Its low moisture content and high salt content made it resistant to spoilage, and its caloric density made it a valuable food source. A ship setting out on a long voyage would carry dozens of these massive wheels, which could weigh up to 60 pounds each. But like everything else on the ship, the cheese was not immune to the ravages of time and infestation. Here's a weird but true fact about ship's cheese. It was often home to a variety of unwanted guests. The most common were cheese mites, microscopic arachnids that would thrive in the cheese, and a type of insect larvae known as cheese skippers. These small, white maggots had the unnerving ability to launch themselves into the air by flexing and releasing their bodies, hence the name skippers. Sailors would often have to cut away the outer, most infested layers of the cheese to get to the good part in the middle. The more hardened sailors, however, would simply eat the cheese, mites, skippers, and all, considering it extra flavor and protein. There are accounts of sailors holding their cheese ration up to their ear and delighting in the faint humming sound made by the thousands of mites moving inside. Historians who study the diets of the past often find that people had a much higher tolerance for what we would consider spoilage or infestation. In an age before refrigeration, food was rarely in a perfect state. A certain amount of mold on bread or insects in grain was simply a fact of life. The line between edible and inedible was drawn in a very different place. For pirates, if it wouldn't kill you, it was probably fair game. You shave another thin slice from your chunk of cheese. You inspect it carefully in the sunlight. You don't see any skippers, but you suspect there are plenty of mites. You decide it's better not to think about it. You pop the sliver into your mouth. The sharp, salty flavor is a welcome, powerful change from the blandness of your usual fare. It's a difficult food, one that fights back, but it's food nonetheless. You watch as a fellow pirate gnaws on his piece, his face a mask of concentration. You are all part of a strange culinary world, a world where your bread is as hard as a rock, your water is green, and your cheese hums. It's a diet that would make a landlubber weep, but for you, it is the taste of survival. The captured cheese and beef have put a temporary end to the starvation, but the crew's mood remains tense. The close brush with the custom of the sea has left everyone on edge. You find yourself paying more attention to the small, subtle economies of the ship, the little side deals and hidden perks that exist just below the surface of the official pirate code, and your attention is drawn back to Silas, the one-legged cook. You've always seen him as a simple functionary, a man whose job is to boil meat and prevent fires. But you start to notice things. You see the ship's carpenter trading a beautifully carved wooden ogle to Silas in exchange for an extra ladle FUL of the greasy slush from the cauldron. You see the sailmaker quietly giving the cook a prime cut of mended canvas, perfect for patching clothes, and receiving a small, carefully wrapped packet of what looks like rendered fat in return. you realize that Silas is not just a cook, he's a businessman, and his primary currency is grease. This is a fascinating and often overlooked part of the shipboard economy. The slush fund you learned about earlier, the money the cook made by selling the collected fat import, was just the official side of his business. At sea, the slush and rendered fat were a valuable, tradable commodity, and the cook controlled the entire supply. Why was this grease so valuable? For a dozen reasons. On a ship made of wooden rope, constantly exposed to the corrosive effects of salt and water, grease was a vital lubricant and preservative. Sailors would use it to waterproof their boots and oilskin coats, making them more supple and water-resistant. They would rub it into the leather of their knife sheaths and belts to keep them from cracking. The carpenter might use it to grease a stubborn pulley or a squeaky hinge. It could even be mixed with soot and used as a crude black paint or sealant. But its most important use was as a source of light. The crew was issued a meager ration of candles, but it was never enough. A resourceful pirate could create a slut lamp, a primitive lamp made from a rag or a piece of rope stuck into a container of slush or fat. It didn't produce much light and it smelled terrible, but it was better than sitting in complete darkness below decks. Silas, as the sole producer of this valuable resource, effectively ran a company store. He would trade his product for small luxuries, favors, or useful items. This gave him a level of influence and wealth far beyond his official station. He was a master of a greasy, self-contained microeconomy. Here's a weirdly specific detail of this enterprise: the quality of the grease mattered. The fat rendered from fresh meat, like the manatee or the captured chickens, was a high-grade, clean product. This was the good stuff, which Silas would trade for a premium. The foul, scummy slush skimmed from the cauldron of boiling salt horse was the low-grade, everyday product, suitable for waterproofing boots but not for much else. The cook had to be a connoisseur of fat. Historians who study the social dynamics of pirate crews often look at these informal economies. Did they undermine the egalitarian principles of the pirate code by creating new, unofficial hierarchies of wealth and influence, or were they a healthy and necessary part of shipboard life? A way for men to use their skills and their resources to improve their own miserable conditions through barter and trade. It was likely a bit of both. While the official distribution of food and plunder was strictly equal, a man's ingenuity and side hustles could still afford him a slightly more comfortable existence. You watch Silas hobble across the deck, his wooden leg thumping a steady, confident rhythm. He is more than just a cook. He is an entrepreneur, a monopolist, a captain of industry in a world of grease and grime. He has taken the foulest, most disgusting byproduct of a terrible diet and spun it into a small empire of influence. It's a lesson in economics, pirate style. Even in a world of rotten ruin, there's always a profit to be made if you know where to look. The Sea Serpent is under sail again, her hull clean, her crew fed, and her spirit room partially restocked with captured rum. The mood is boisterous and overconfident. One evening, the captain, feeling generous after a successful day of drills, authorizes an extra ration of rum for all hands. The decision is met with a roar of approval. The grog flows freely. As the sun sets, the ship transforms from a disciplined vessel of war into a floating tavern. The fiddler takes his perch, the singing begins, and the familiar, chaotic energy of a pirate party takes hold. This time, however, the celebration has a direct and unfortunate consequence for your dinner. Silas the cook, never one to be left out of a celebration, has been enjoying the extra rum ration as much as anyone. By the time he hobbles down to the galley to prepare the evening meal, he is, to put it politely, 3 sheets to the wind. You and a few others, your stomachs rumbling, peer down into the galley to see what's taking so long. The scene that greets you is one of pure culinary slapstick. Silas is trying to chop a piece of salt beef, but his coordination has completely deserted him. He sways with the motion of the ship, narrowly missing his fingers with the cleaver on each downstroke. He attempts to ladle water into the cauldron, but misjudges the distance and sloshes a gallon of it onto the floor, nearly dousing his fire. He sings a slurred, off-key sea shanty to himself as he works, occasionally stopping to take another swig from a bottle he has stashed nearby. This is a key historical reality that is often glossed over in the romantic tales. While pirates were skilled and hardened seamen, they were also, by and large, functioning alcoholics. The constant, heavy drinking was an integral part of their culture, but it had very real and very dangerous consequences for the day-to-day operation of the ship. Cooking, a dangerous enough task on a sober day, becomes a high-wire act of recklessness when performed by a drunk. The risk of fire, always present, is now magnified 100-fold. A dropped torch, a mishandled hot coal, a greasy rag left too close to the hearth, any of these small mistakes could lead to catastrophe. One of the other pirates, a man named Finn who has managed to remain relatively sober, decides to intervene. "Silas, you old dog, let me give you a hand with that." Finn climbs down into the galley. He is not a cook, and his well-intentioned efforts only add to the chaos. He tries to add a sack of dried peas to the stew, but his foot slips on the wet deck, and he dumps the entire sack's contents onto the floor, where they mix with the spilled water and bilge grime. Here's a weird but true aspect of these situations: group participation. Seeing Finn's attempt, another drunken pirate decides he, too, has a secret culinary talent. He grabs a handful of hardtack and, instead of breaking it, tosses the whole biscuits directly into the cauldron, declaring that it will make the stew thicker. The result will be as to containing a few large, concrete-like lumps of inedible, semi-dissolved flour. Historians who study the social behavior on these ships often wonder how any work got done at all, given the prodigious consumption of alcohol. The answer lies in the boom and bust cycle of their work. There were long periods of relative inactivity, where drunkenness was tolerated, but when it was time for action, a chase, a battle, or navigating a storm, most crews could snap into a state of professional focus with remarkable speed. The problem was the gray areas in between, like a celebratory Tuesday night. The stew that is eventually served that evening is, without a doubt, the single worst meal you have ever had. It's a watery, greasy broth with half-cooked, undesalinated meat, a floor's worth of dirty peas, and giant, doughy landmines of hardtack. It's almost completely inedible. The crew, however, is too drunk to care. They laugh at the terrible stew, making jokes about Silas's special recipe. They are fueled by rum, not by nutrition. They will pay for it tomorrow with hangovers and stomach cramps. But for tonight, the terrible food is just another part of the anarchic fun. You push the lumpy stew around your bowl, picking out the few edible bits of meat. You learn another important lesson about pirate cuisine sometimes. The greatest threat to your dinner isn't the weevils or the rot, it's the chef. You've survived storms, scurvy, starvation, and even Silas's drunken cooking. Weeks have bled into months, and the voyage is nearing its end. The sea serpent is heavy with plunder, not just gold and silver, but mundane, valuable cargo like textiles, sugar, and tobacco. The ship turns its bow towards a friendly pirate haven, a place where the loot can be divided and the crew can finally set foot on solid ground. As you near port, a strange mood settles over the crew. The talk is no longer of fighting or future prizes. It's of something much simpler. The men gather in small groups, their voices low and full of a longing that is almost painful to hear. They are not talking about what they will buy with their share of the treasure. They are talking about what they will eat. This is the final, essential truth of the pirate's life. After months of enduring a diet that was, at its best, monotonous and, at its worst, a disgusting ordeal, the ultimate fantasy was not a mountain of gold. It was a simple, decent meal. A pirate from Bristol talks, with tears in his eyes, about his mother's meat pies, the flaky crust and the rich, savory gravy, a Frenchman from Marseilles describes, in poetic detail, a simple bowl of fish stew with garlic, saffron, and fresh bread for dipping. A young man from a small farming village dreams of nothing more than a baked potato, split open and filled with fresh butter and cheese. Their fantasies are not of extravagant banquets or royal feasts. They are of the simple, honest, and flavorful foods of their childhood. They crave freshness. They crave texture. They crave anything that doesn't taste of salt, rut, or despair. This deep, visceral craving is a powerful historical lens through which to view the motivations of these men. We often think of pirates as being driven by greed or a love of violence, but perhaps, on a more fundamental level, they were driven by a desire to escape a life of constant, grinding deprivation. The life of a common sailor in the Navy or the merchant marine was one of terrible food and brutal discipline. Piracy offered a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless to live a life where you could, at least occasionally, eat and drink like a king. Here's a weirdly specific detail about the end of a voyage to Bumboat. As the ship entered a harbor, it would often be met by small boats, bumboats, rowed by local merchants, mostly women. These boats were floating convenience stores, and their most popular items were fresh food and drink. They would sell fresh bread, ripe fruit, meat pies, and bottles of local beer to the desperate, homecoming sailors. The pirates, flush with plunder, would spend their first silver coins on these simple, glorious streets, a delicious appetizer before the main feast ashore. When the sea serpent finally drops anchor and the plunder is divided, you receive your share. It's a heavy bag of coins, more money than you have ever seen in your life. It represents months of hardship and risk. It is the key to a new life. And what is the first thing you do with this newfound wealth? You don't buy a new coat. You don't find the nearest gambling den. You walk, with a determined stride, to the first decent-looking tavern you can find. You sit down at a sturdy wooden table, a real table. You order a steak, a loaf of bread, and a bottle of wine. When the food arrives, you just look at it for a moment, marveling at its simple perfection. The steak is sizzling and juicy. The bread is soft and warm. The wine is rich and dark. You take your first bite, and in that moment, all the hardship of the voyage, the hardtack, the salt horse, the green water, the scurvy, the fear, it all melts away. This is the real treasure. This is what you fought for, what you starved for. Historians can debate the economic impact of piracy, its political ramifications, its role in the shaping of empires. But as you sit there, savoring every single bite of your first real meal in half a year, you understand the pirate's life on a much more personal level. It was a desperate, violent, and often short-lived gamble, and the ultimate jackpot was not a chest full of gold, but a plate full of hot food. The warmth of the tavern, the rich taste of real food, slowly settles into your bones, a deep and satisfying comfort. The boisterous noise of the port town begins to fade into a distant hum. Like the memory of a storm that has long since passed, your thoughts drift away from the shore, back out onto the open water, not to the hunger or the fear, but to the quiet moments in between, the gentle, rhythmic rocking of your hammock in the dark, the ghostly light of phosphorescence trailing in the ship's wake, the immense, silent canopy of stars, so much brighter and closer than you had ever seen on land, the soft creak of the ship's timbers, a sound that was once your entire world, now a distant lullaby. You are no longer on that restless sea. You are safe in a quiet harbor. The anchor is down. The voyage is done. Let the gentle tide of sleep pull you away from the shore, into a calm and peaceful dream. The long night watch is over. You can finally rest. The end of the article. Good night.